You're listening to the I'm Busy Being Awesome podcast with Paula Engebretson, episode number 258. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. How are you? What is happening? I believe that this episode is dropping on July 1st, which means that if you are listening to this in real time, we are exactly halfway through 2024, which makes my brain want to melt a little bit. Can you believe this? How has that happened so quickly? And also, let's take this opportunity to check in. And let's start by checking in on just the last month. How was the last month for you? What went well? What are we celebrating? What was challenging? What have you learned? And then, if you want to expand that reflection even further, think back. How has this first half of the year been? What are you celebrating? What do you want to remember from the last 6 months? What are some of the lessons that you've learned? What are you looking forward to in the next 6 months? Again, time manages to slip by so ridiculously fast, especially for those of us who are super time blind. And so I think it can be powerful to take this opportunity every month or two to pause and check in on where we're at and see how we're feeling and think about what we are looking forward to. And that actually ties in a bit with what our main focus is today, which is all about how we can balance long-term planning and long-term goals with our more pressing priorities in the moment. And the inspiration for today's topic was a question that someone asked in We're Busy Being Awesome, maybe a month or so ago, about long-term goals and how we can maintain our progress on our long-term goals without letting them take over our immediate priorities. And their main question was essentially, how can I keep a big picture goal, like moving back near my family in 3 to 5 years? How can I keep that on my radar without making it a priority now? I find myself getting stressed and distracted by it, even though it's technically not urgent. And I think that this is such an important question that can come up on a whole bunch of different levels, whether it's big picture goals like a move 3 to 5 years out, or something that's a little bit closer, 3 to 5 months out. Regardless of the time frame, I think it's important to learn how we can keep important but not urgent goals on our radar without letting them either A, take all of our energy and focus and kind of prevent us from doing the work that we want to do in the moment, or B, letting it completely fall off our radar until it's far too late, and then it becomes this really urgent thing that we hadn't really been preparing for along the way. And if you're like most of us ADHD brains, that balance between keeping it on our radar and also tending to our current priorities, it probably doesn't come super naturally. It certainly doesn't for me. I mean, just think about it. Have you ever found yourself thinking about or daydreaming, some future plan, whether it's moving to a new country or going back to school or making a career change, and then suddenly these plans completely consume your thoughts, right? They pull you away from whatever it is that you were trying to focus on in the moment. For myself, if I leave that unchecked, my excitement will have me spending hours researching and rabbit holing and spending so much time thinking about this new long-term goal, despite the fact that I have a much more immediate and no less important task that also needs my attention right now. And again, if you can relate, you're certainly in good company. You are not alone. These scenarios are incredibly common, especially for those of us with ADHD and ADHD tendencies. This allure of the future plan, especially if we have a tendency to drop into perfectionist fantasy where everything is perfect and amazing in that new plan, it can be so strong to really focus on those future plans that it derails us and our productivity and the things that we want to do right now. It can really create so much additional and unnecessary stress in our present life. Right? We spend so much time thinking about that future thing and what we're doing and how it's going to be that it creates a bunch of stress in our current moment because we're not actually tending to the things that need tending to right now. But why does this happen? And more importantly, how can we actually support ourselves when it does so that we can do the things we want to do while keeping those long-term goals on our radar? Well, that's exactly what we're talking about today. So throughout the episode, we are going to explore the unique challenges that the ADHD brain faces with balancing our long-term goals and our immediate priorities. Okay, so we're going to dive into the specific reasons behind this struggle, and from there, consider practical, actionable strategies that you can put into place today to help you stay focused on what matters most without letting those long-term goals fall to the wayside. So if you've ever felt overwhelmed thinking about these future plans, or you've struggled to stay present, this episode is for you. So let's begin by talking about the why behind it. Why is it that long-term planning is such an obstacle for those of us with ADHD and ADHD tendencies? First and foremost, there's the fact that those of us with ADHD struggle with our executive functions. You hear me talk about this all the time on the podcast, right? We struggle with our executive functions, full stop. And because we have a hard time with our executive functions, it can show up as this challenge to manage our tasks, to prioritize effectively, to stay organized. So not surprisingly, with this difficulty in terms of breaking down big projects into smaller steps and then putting them in the right sequence, right? Sequencing them out, and then actually prioritizing what to do first, because we struggle with all of that, of course, it's going to make it much more difficult to balance our immediate projects with our future plans. So for example, if I'm not careful, I can get stuck in big picture planning of goals and ideas in my business. I love thinking about new courses I want to create, trainings I want to run, books I want to write, even though I have current projects on deck that need my attention now. I love to stay in that planning space. And again, for myself personally, I know my tendency is to stay in that big picture because organizing the bigger projects and the goals, that actually feels more manageable when I can stay in the macro. And it feels so exciting looking at them from far away. Much more exciting than when I have to zoom in and detail out the day-to-day minutia that's required to actually write and schedule all 12 automated emails, or building a new landing page and writing all the website copy. That minutia is much less fun to think about than the big picture macro. I would much rather stay at that 10,000 foot view and imagine how everything is going to beautifully fit together than to actually have to fit all those things together, than to get down on the ground and figure out how the pieces all work together specifically. So that's one major obstacle. The next, in regard to balancing our big picture goals with our current priorities, is time blindness. Now, this is related to executive functions, but I want to highlight it specifically here. Okay, time blindness. If time blindness is a newer term to you, essentially what I'm referring to is what many ADHDers struggle with in regard to accurately perceiving the passage of time. So Dr. Barkley talks about those of us with ADHD being in the now or the not now. Okay, we don't have that longer time horizon that allows us to kind of look out into the future. And when we take this into consideration for today's topic of long-term planning, that time blindness can really impact how we think about our long-term tasks, because it can leave us thinking that the long-term projects far off in the distance are either equally as urgent as the immediate tasks, because it's either now or not now. And that can create this sense of pressure to do everything now, or it can be so far off that we're like, that'll happen eventually, but we never actually make any strides forward so that when that eventual time comes, we haven't done the things to make it happen. So what might that look like? For example, you might feel this overwhelming urge to start researching which school districts are the best in the new state that you're moving to, even though you're not going to be moving for 3 to 5 years, because your brain is struggling to distinguish the urgency of that task for something more immediate on your schedule. So that is obstacle number 2. And then mixed in with time blindness comes obstacle number 3, which is hyperfocus. And hyperfocus is this state where our brain gets intensely absorbed in a task or an idea, often to the exclusion of everything else. And this can be a double-edged sword, since it can really make future planning seem incredibly engaging and urgent. So for instance, you might find yourself spending hours reading about the top 10 neighborhoods where you want to move, despite, again, that timeline being 3 to 5 years out. Meanwhile, you're putting off the current work projects because your brain has completely hyper-focused on the topic of moving. Okay? So that is obstacle number 3, which is hyperfocus, and it tends to intertwine beautifully with that time blindness as we rabbit hole, really focusing on that one thing, even though it's maybe not the most important in the sequence of events. And then obstacle number 4, the last one that I want to talk about today, is kind of a sneaky one. And I call it an attempt to prevent future overwhelm. So for some of us ADHD brains, we know how uncomfortable it is to feel overwhelmed. And we think that if we can organize and plan and focus on the project or the goal in the future enough, if we can do all the planning, that's actually going to help prevent overwhelm in the future. And here's the deal. Part of that's true. Okay? That's why this is a little bit sticky. On the one hand, planning things out and working through the details can help. When we plan ahead a bit, it can help us think through potential obstacles and really kind of map things out and set aside time so that we ensure we're making the continual progress forward. But just as is the case with most strengths, they can also be overused and then turn into a weakness. So in this situation, the preemptive planning can actually create this paradox where we have this attempt to try and avoid future overwhelm, but that actually results in current overwhelm instead. Again, we're so focused on trying to avoid the future overwhelm by over-planning and thinking through every tiny detail, even though things might still be in flux, and we're stressing all about that future plan and all of our energies over there. Meanwhile, we are avoiding the tasks and the project that have a much quicker turnaround time. Those deadlines begin piling up, and all of this additional stress can keep us from actually focusing on our current priorities. So again, that struggle to balance our long-term goals and our current projects and tasks, it is a very real obstacle for the ADHD brain. And some of the key blocks that tend to get in our way include our challenge with executive functions, time blindness, hyperfocus, and this attempt to prevent future overwhelm. So now that we know the why it is a challenge for us, let's talk about what we can do about it. How can we support ourselves in these moments? How can we help our brains to create the structure and the foresight that we want to help us stay on track with these long-term goals without letting them kind of derail us from our current projects and tasks? First, I like to begin by giving my brain a flexible outline or a flexible timeline under which this project or this goal will unfold. I think it can be really helpful to create, again, that 10,000-foot view of where we are going over the upcoming months or years ahead. So for example, if we think about moving again, when I planned my move from Massachusetts to Minnesota last year, it was really probably a 2-year process. And so I went through this similar challenge as my client that she was talking about of trying to balance this short-term projects and tasks with my long-term goal of making the move. So to help my brain do this, I first mapped out a general, flexible plan for getting me from Massachusetts to Minnesota. And I asked myself, if I want to make this happen within the next year, what might that timeline look like? What are the steps involved? How much time do I anticipate each step is going to take? What are the costs involved in this move? Now, of course, when I started asking myself these questions, my brain was like, I don't know. Stop asking me this. I have no idea what any of these answers are. So if your brain does that too, don't worry, you're in good company. I noticed that. I noticed my brain freaking out. I acknowledged it. And then I went, okay, let's break down the steps and figure out what we do know. Okay, let's break things down and start asking around. I asked Google. I talked to friends who had moved recently. If I were doing it now, I would be using ChatGPT to help me with those steps. So I figured out a general idea of what these answers were, the timeline, when things needed to happen, what potential costs would be. And I want to reinforce here that I didn't hold these timelines tightly. Again, I use them as a general reference. Essentially, the timeline gave my brain some peace of mind. In fact, creating that timeline helped me to truly realize when I first made it a couple of years out that there actually wasn't much I needed to do right away. I didn't need to be looking for houses in Minnesota 2 years out because those houses weren't going to be on the market any longer. Plus, that general timeline also allowed me to pace myself so I could focus on the one or maybe two things that did require more time or that I could work on immediately. So things like saving money for the move or starting to declutter things I knew I didn't need and certainly didn't want to pay to move halfway across the country. So in other words, for any type of long-term goal, it doesn't have to be a move, okay? Maybe you are moving, but it could be thinking about changing a career, or you're saving for a big purchase, or you want to do some serious traveling for several months around the world or something. I would begin by intentionally dedicating a good hour or two to thoughtfully mapping out a big picture overview. Again, you don't have to get into the minutia, but give yourself that big picture overview. And I especially think this is powerful now that we have something like ChatGPT or Goblin.tools to help. And as a side note, if you haven't heard my episode on how we can use ChatGPT to support our ADHD brains, I do suggest checking it out. It's just a couple of episodes back, episode 255. And you can also grab my free cheat sheet. It has a bunch of specific prompts, almost 40 of them, I think. And you can literally just copy and paste those prompts into ChatGPT to get step-by-step support in whatever it is you need. So you can grab that at I'mBusyBeingAwesome.com/chat. But again, set aside a few hours to really let your brain imagine and work through the potential big picture plan. Ask your friends, ask the Google. ChatGPT can help you out, right? Whatever you need to help you work through the steps and answer those questions. From there, we're going to literally map those things out on your calendar. Okay? So give yourself a lot of wiggle room here. Again, we're holding this loosely. But map out those specific times when something new needs to happen to help you move that next step forward. And then set up a reminder or appointments in your calendar. I do recommend using a digital calendar here because if it's several years out, you probably won't be having the same paper calendar. So use something that is a regular tool in your toolkit. Most of us use the Google Calendar or whatever the Microsoft version is, right? Many of us use some sort of digital calendar. That's where I would be putting these and these reminders and appointments, okay? So for example, maybe you say in January 2026, start looking at XYZ, okay? So again, it doesn't have to be broken down every little thing, but it might be January 2026, we're going to start looking at realtors or something, okay? So writing down these steps helps the brain know it's in the books. You've already taken care of the plan. So now you can focus on what matters most right now. You've really closed the loop. And then when January of 2026 pops up, you can start thinking about that next thing. It's literally in the calendar, okay? You've closed the loop. Now, for ongoing things like saving money for a down payment or decluttering to make that move easier, you might set recurring reminders or use something like habit trackers to visually remind you of your progress and keep track of it. Okay. And if you're thinking to yourself, yeah, right, Paula, like I'm actually going to stick to a routine or those habits, be sure to grab my free training called the ADHD Routine Revamp. Because whether you're establishing a routine of decluttering or you're saving for a vacation or you're studying to go back to school, I literally designed this free training to help you lock in the routine and make it stick. Okay. So you can also snag that through the link in the show notes or go to I'mBusyBeingAwesome.com/routine. All right. So you've created your overarching 10,000 foot plan. You've mapped it out onto your digital calendar with reminders so that future you can stay on track with those long-term goals without allowing the current things to distract you, right? You've been able to close the loop and focus on the present project instead. Now, I have 3 other suggestions to help with this long-term planning and help you stay focused on the present goals without losing sight of the big picture. Okay. So the next tip is to set up a specific time each month for future planning and reference. For my clients, this could be, the first body double session of the month. Come to that call and you can do this work there. Okay. Similarly, you could pair up with a colleague at work or your bestie or your spouse and have a planning/goals check-in once a month. By having the accountability of someone else who is working on their own goals, paired with deciding ahead of time when you're going to do this each month, it allows you to allocate mental energy more efficiently, both on the planning process when that time comes, but also on what you're working on now. Again, you're compartmentalizing. You're able to focus on the plans at that monthly planning time, and during the rest of the time, you're able to focus on your daily tasks and projects. And then, of course, as that goal gets closer and it moves up higher in the order of priority, you might move those sessions to more often, or you might start setting aside specific times for working on that goal more often throughout the month. Now, alternatively, as an aside, you could also always keep that monthly check-in and that planning session for any of your long-term goals, okay? By dedicating an hour or 2 on the first Sunday of the month or the last Tuesday body double session of the month, you give yourself permission to focus on long-term goals, long-term plans without them becoming this constant distraction. And you can use this in a lot of different ways, right? You might actually spend time researching new career opportunities or planning that specific vacation during those planning hours. Or you might spend time during that hour breaking down the next steps that you're actually going to do throughout the month to help ensure you're moving forward on that goal. So you can use that time that you set aside to literally do the things to move you forward on your goal. Or you can step back and use that time to literally plan out next steps throughout the coming month and know when you're going to do those things. Okay, so depending on what works for you, depending on the timeline, depending on the amount of work that's left to do before you want to reach that goal or before the move or before the new job, you can assess whether you want to be working on the project during that planning session, or if you want to be planning during the planning session and then executing throughout the month. Either way, it's going to help you make that persistent movement forward on the things that matter most to you. All right. Building on this, I think it can be really helpful to maintain an ongoing note in your notes app or in what I call my brilliant ideas list, which I will also link to in the show notes. But having one place, whether it's a physical notebook or an app or a Google Doc to capture your thoughts and your questions and your tasks related to those different long-term goals, can be incredibly helpful because it allows you to, again, offload all of these different thoughts from your mind about this goal, which both reduces the cognitive load on your brain and also prevents distraction while reassuring your brain, don't worry, I'm not going to forget. I put it in to my brilliant ideas list. It will be there for me when we get to the monthly planning session next month. So for example, if I think about a new course I want to teach, okay, and I think about it while I'm working on an entirely different project, I can put that in my brilliant ideas list. And that allows me to acknowledge the idea, go, oh yeah, that seems really fun. Let's think about that during our next planning session. And then I can close that loop, write it down, and get back to my current focus without letting it derail me, right? So I've ensured that it's there for me. That new idea is there for me when it's time to plan for it in the coming month or the coming quarter for my business. But I also ensure that I am staying focused on the thing that I've identified for myself that day. All right, so once we've written down that new idea or that new goal into our brilliant ideas list, then we need to get back to the project at hand. How do we do that? Because sometimes we just want to go do the new fun thing that's way more dopamine inducing. And I think one of the most critical, important, helpful tools out there, in addition to the process of breaking down steps, like I always talk about on this podcast, one of the most supportive tools you can have in your toolkit is to make sure you remember your why. Why is this project or goal or task that you are working on so important to you? Knowing your why can really help you anchor your attention and your motivation. And I know this sounds like just an extra step, but I'm telling you, it's so key and incredibly powerful. When you pause and you understand your deeper purpose behind your current tasks and your current projects, it becomes much easier to bring yourself back to that topic or that task at hand, even after you've just had that brilliant idea that you've written down in your list, right? It allows you to come back to the topic at hand to ensure you're making progress on that current goal as well. For instance, let's say you are working on this critical project at work, okay? This is where we practice the pause. For all of my current and past clients, as a reminder, you will find the literal step-by-step to this of practicing the pause right at the beginning of our framework in your client portal, okay? But we practice the pause and then we remind ourselves why. We think about this critical project and we think about how it's contributing to our overall career goals or how it supports our team or how it might align with our personal values. This deeper connection can help you to really reinforce your commitment to the task at hand and help to allow that urge to go look at that new goal, kind of allow it to move through you without acting on it. Right? It allows you to resist that urge to just go do the new goal or the new idea and instead stay present with the task at hand that does matter to you. And this is especially true when you can remind your brain that you've already taken care of future you because you've already mapped out the steps. You've already set those reminders. You've already put them in your calendar as next steps. And you've committed to that monthly check-in with your bestie or your coach or your colleague or on the body double calls. You're right on track. And you're focusing on what matters most right now. All right? Okay. We've made it through all the steps. I know I threw a lot at you today, so I'm going to do just a quick rundown of the actual action steps so that you can put them into practice and help you balance your long-term goals with your current priorities. So step one, make sure that you create that general yet flexible plan for your long-term goal. Outline the timeline, the steps involved, estimate generally how much time you might need, and then probably triple it, and use this as a flexible guide to give your brain a peace of mind. Then schedule reminders and appointments into your digital calendar for the tasks related to those long-term goals. This is going to help you stay organized and ensures those future tasks don't get forgotten. Next, use tools like ChatGPT and habit trackers and things to your advantage. Leverage tools like ChatGPT for planning. Use habit trackers for ongoing routines and habits. It's going to help you lighten the cognitive load when you're breaking down those goals into smaller projects, and it's also helping you visually see your progress and stay on track and keep that motivation going. Next, set your monthly planning sessions. So designate a specific time each month for future planning. You can pair up with a friend or your colleague, join the body double session for accountability, and create that time so you can focus solely on your long-term plans and goals without letting them kind of intrude on your daily tasks and projects right now. Up next, capture your ideas in your brilliant ideas list. So maintain some sort of dedicated note in your Notes app or a Google Doc or some sort of physical notebook for all of your different thoughts and ideas and questions related to those long-term goals. This, again, helps to offload your brain so you don't have to hold it all in there and ensures you're not going to forget about those ideas. And then finally, we want to remember your why. Regularly remind yourself of why the current project that you're working on, the tasks that you're working on, are so important. Knowing your why is going to help you to anchor your attention and your motivation and make it a little bit easier to stay present with those immediate tasks. And when your mind wanders, easier to bring it back. By implementing these different strategies, you can create a balanced approach to maintaining your long-term goals while also staying focused on your current priorities right now. And as a reminder, if you want to grab the ChatGPT cheat sheet, the Brilliant Ideas list, or my ADHD routine revamp training, I've got you covered. I've linked to everything in the show notes right there for you. All right, my friends, that's going to do it for us this week. And if you are ready to take these concepts and apply them to your life, if you're ready to learn how to work with your ADHD brain in a way that's best for you, I invite you to check out today's show notes where you can learn more about how we can work together, both in my small group coaching program, We're Busy Being Awesome, as well as one-on-one coaching. And if you know someone who would love to learn more about how to make progress on their long-term goals without ignoring their current priorities, would you be a rock star and share this episode with them? Send them the episode in a text, share it on your Instagram stories, whatever you do. Please know that you are helping get these tools to even more ADHD brains who need it. And I so appreciate you. Until next time, keep being awesome. I'll talk with you soon.